Everybody out, now! Move, move, move!
Dispatch, we've got a code blue at the Orca tank. Requesting immediate medical backup.
911, what's your emergency?
The whale's got her! He's thrashing her! She can't reach the surface!
Ma'am, who exactly is in the water?
Elena! She's in danger! She's not coming up! Please! Send help now!
In that moment, the stadium transformed from spectacle to nightmare. Sirens cut through the humid air, applause dissolved into panic, and thousands of eyes locked on a single tank where 6 tons of raw muscle and instinct surged in black and white arcs. Nix, the orca Elena had trusted for years, loomed as both partner and predator. His dorsal fins sliced the water like a blade, each movement calculated, immense, unstoppable. Elena had believed in patience and connection in the fragile thread between human and animal. But on that warm February afternoon, trust unraveled in an instant. What began as a flawless performance collapsed into chaos, leaving families frozen in their seats, children clutching toys, parents shielding their eyes from a scene too terrible to process. This was no show, no curtain call, only the roar of sirens, the shouts of trainers, and the heavy silence that follows when instinct breaks through choreography. And as Nix circled the pool, dragging Elena further from reach, one haunting question remained suspended in the humid Florida air. Would she ever come back to the surface? Welcome to True Animal Terrors, where real danger meets real stories. Don't look away. Beneath the bright Florida sun, Keltie Byrne's fascination with the ocean never began with crashing waves or long afternoons at the beach. Instead, it took root far inland in a quiet lakeside town where her neighbors chased each other through sprinklers or disappeared into glowing screens. While they laughed, Keltie sat with her back against her bedroom wall, a heavy marine encyclopedia balanced on her knees. She studied the elegant rise of dorsal fins, memorized every dolphin species by heart, and practiced the sharp whistles of bottlenose pods until even the family dog joined in with confused howls. This was not a passion she wore on her sleeve with posters and slogans. It was steady, rhythmic, and unyielding, like the tide pressing against stone, shaping it grain by grain. Her parents, accustomed to fishing boats rather than stadium shows, couldn't fully understand it. Yet for Keltie, there was never doubt. It wasn't about if she would work with marine animals, but when. That moment arrived on her 14th birthday. After months of saving, her parents led her through the gates of SeaWorld Orlando, where the scent of popcorn mingled with brine carried on the breeze. She saw her first orca glide through a shimmering pool, a black and white colossus that seemed less like an animal and more like a living sculpture. She didn't cheer, didn't move, hardly even breathed. She simply stared, held captive by the sight. From that instant, her course was set. 4 years later, she arrived at SeaWorld not as a trainer, but with a mop in one hand and quiet determination in the other. She scrubbed railings, hauled buckets, and observed from the shadows, imprinting every hand signal, every subtle pause until the rhythm of the trainers became second nature. That perseverance carried her upward, assistant technician, apprentice, and finally trainer, standing at the water's edge with a whistle and a lifetime of dreams at her back. Dolphins, belugas, young orcas, she worked with them all. But none carried the gravity of the one who awaited her next, a creature who had not been born under bright lights, but under endless skies, a whale named Nix. Nix's story began far from stadium bleachers in synchronized music. He was born into the cold, rolling waters of the North Atlantic, where each season carried him on long migrations through shifting tides. For nearly 2 years, he swam at his mother's side, learning the layered language of whistles, clicks, and pulsing calls that bound his pod together. These were not tricks for an audience, but lessons honed over millennia: how to track herring through swirling clouds of silver, how to coordinate hunts with precision, how to move as one across the open sea. His world stretched for miles in every direction, horizons unbroken by walls. Then came the nets. In a blur of foam and thrashing tails, Nix's freedom dissolved into chaos. He was separated, hoisted above the waves, and lowered into steel enclosures, where the rhythm of tides was replaced by the hum of pumps. What followed was a series of transfers from one facility to another, each relocation peeling away more of what he had once known. Concrete walls confined him. Trainers' hand signals replaced the guiding calls of his family, and fish tossed as rewards became the substitute for the chase. But trust never took root. Trainers quickly learned that Nix was different. Some whales adapted to performance, falling into rehearsed patterns with predictable ease. Nix did not. He drifted for hours, ignored cues, even refused food altogether. And in his history lay a darker warning: a trainer at a distant park pulled into the water, never resurfaced alive. Official reports labeled it an accident, and the record quietly faded from public memory. Yet within the circles of marine parks, whispers of Nix's volatility followed wherever he went. For many, he was a liability to be managed. To Keltie, however, he was more than a risk. She saw a fractured spirit she believed could still be reached. It was this conviction, steady as her childhood tide, that carried her forward toward the day when their fragile bond would be tested under the flawless blue sky of a February morning in Orlando. That morning, February 16th, dawned with no hint of what was to come. The Florida air was warm and sharp, with salt threaded with the faint sweetness of sunscreen carried in on the breeze. Families streamed through SeaWorld Orlando's gates, clutching souvenir cups, and Maps children pressing plush orca toys tight to their chests as they hurried toward Shamu Stadium. Their laughter mingled with the low hum of anticipation, a chorus of expectation that would soon fall silent. Behind the scenes, Keltie prepared as she always did, sliding into her black wetsuit, checking the whistle at her neck, and running the show's sequence in her mind. Routine wrapped around her like armor. Nix had been remarkably compliant all week, responding with precision, delivering rehearsed leaps and dives as if at last he had chosen to meet her halfway. A fellow trainer remarked almost with relief, "Maybe he's finally settling in." Keltie answered with only a small smile, unwilling to break the quiet hope that had been building. When the music began, lights shimmered across the pool's surface like liquid glass. Nix rose on cue, sending arcs of spray cascading over the audience, triggering laughter and applause. Keltie guided him through spins and dives, each movement to the crowd a spectacle, but to her it was a dialogue, silent, instinctive, built on the fragile trust she had worked years to earn. Confidence swelled as the routine reached its peak. For the finale, she stepped closer to the edge, signaling a synchronized breach. Nix surfaced beside her, immense and powerful, the black curve of his head glistening under the spotlights. She lifted her arm, the final cue. But in that instant, the language they had shared faltered. Nix shifted, his massive jaws closing around the trailing edge of her ponytail. At first, the grip seemed almost tentative, a test. Then came the pull. Keltie vanished beneath the surface before anyone in the crowd could comprehend what had begun. For a few disorienting seconds, the audience reacted with hesitation. Gasps rippled through the stands, but some clapped, believing it was part of the performance, an unexpected flourish in a show designed to thrill. Music still pounded through the stadium speakers, masking the urgency that had suddenly taken hold at the water's edge. White foam boiled where Keltie had disappeared the surface, breaking only in flashes of black and white as Nix twisted beneath. Trainers stationed nearby froze, hearts stuttering in the space between disbelief and action. Then instinct seized them. Emergency whistles cut through the music, sharp and piercing, and the soundtrack halted mid-note. Red lights strobed across the stands, jolting the audience into uneasy silence. Buckets of fish were hurled toward the water. Trainers slapped the surface with open palms. Every trick in their arsenal meant to distract the whale, to break the grip. But Nix was unmoved. From above, glimpses of Keltie appeared, an arm breaking the surface, a desperate gasp, then vanished again as the whale pulled her under with terrifying control. The water thrashed in tight, deliberate arcs, each surge a reminder of the power contained in his massive frame. Parents shielded children's eyes. Others raised phones in trembling hands, uncertain if they were capturing a rescue or a tragedy unfolding in real time. A trainer's voice cracked over the radio code black. Orca aggression. Trainer submerged. Divers prepared at the platform's edge, masks in hand. But each attempt to enter stalled at the sight of Nix circling with relentless precision. He was not flailing. He was not confused. Every movement was calculated, as though guarding the very space trainers were desperate to reach. Minutes stretched heavy and merciless, and with each passing heartbeat, the line between show and survival slipped further out of reach. The atmosphere inside Shamu Stadium shifted from excitement to dread, the weight of realization pressing down on every witness. Nix's black and white body sliced through the pool in tight, deliberate arcs, his movements more like a hunter corralling prey than a performer executing cues. At one point, he breached with explosive force, revealing Keltie's limp form trailing alongside him, her hair streaming like seaweed, her wetsuit torn at the shoulder. The collective gasp that followed was sharp enough to fill in the air, erasing any illusion that this was still a choreographed act. Trainers shouted his name, signaling with every motion they had ever taught him, but Nix was beyond the reach of rehearsed language. The net team deployed, trying to cut off sections of the pool, yet he evaded effortlessly, diving beneath barriers and reappearing where they least expected, still clutching her. Guests in the stands trembled between horror and disbelief. Some cried out for help as if their voices could break the water's grip. Others sat frozen, hands pressed over mouths. Phones hovered uncertainly, recording a moment no one wanted but could not look away from. Behind the scenes, divers stood ready, but hesitated with every second, knowing that entering the pool meant confronting thousands of pounds of raw muscle and intent. The trainers' frantic whistles, the tossed fish, the desperate splashes, all of it was ignored. Nix was focused, each turn executed with uncanny control, as though the years of captivity had been stripped away, and only his primal instincts remained. And somewhere between the slapping water, the screams, and the sirens, a single realization settled over the crowd. The trainer they had cheered for minutes earlier might never return from the depths now holding her. Half an hour passed before trainers managed to steer Nix into the isolation pool, a space designed for containment rather than spectacle. Only then could the rescue team reach Keltie. By the time her body was lifted onto the platform, the stadium had fallen into a silence so heavy it seemed to smother the air itself. Paramedics worked with swift, practiced motions, but there was no mistaking the absence of life. A white sheet was drawn over her, and in that instant, the truth was undeniable. Guests were ushered out in hushed lines, their footsteps echoing up the concrete aisles like the toll of a distant bell. Within the hour, the stadium was shut down. Gates' locked staff dismissed media vans circling like gulls over still water. Headlines took shape before her stretcher even left the grounds trainer killed by killer whale during live show. Yet for those who had witnessed it, no headline could capture the raw paralysis of the moment, the helplessness of watching a life extinguished in plain sight. Nix floated alone in the center of his pool, unmoving, his tall dorsal fin slicing through the still water like a solitary blade. Around him, filtration pumps hummed and stage lights glared cold and indifferent, as though the energy that had once filled the stadium had been drained away. The laughter of families, the applause of crowds, all dissolved into memory, leaving only the sound of water lapping against concrete and the quiet murmur of radios. As the sun dipped behind the park, one question lingered unspoken, suspended over every empty seat and silent walkway. How had it come to this? The investigation began almost immediately, long before night settled over Orlando. Law enforcement sealed the stadium, cordoning off entrances, as technicians combed through surveillance footage and trainers provided shaken statements. What surfaced was a trail of warnings that had never reached the public eye. Internal memos documented Nix's refusal to follow cues, sudden bouts of aggression during rehearsals, and extended stretches of unresponsiveness. Some reports even referenced earlier incidents in other facilities, red flags that had been filed away quietly rather than confronted. To audiences, Nix was a star attraction, the embodiment of raw beauty and power. Behind closed doors, he was a liability, a risk folded into the routine of entertainment. Within days, the story leapt from local broadcasts to national headlines, igniting debates across talk shows and dinner tables. Was fault to be laid at the whale's instinct, at Keltie's choice to trust him, or at the system that placed them together in pursuit of spectacle? Outside SeaWorld's gates, two groups quickly formed. One held candles and photos of Keltie, their voices rising in calls for greater safety protections. The other raised banners that read, "Free Nix," demanding the release of an animal they believed should never have been caged in the first place. Advocacy groups seized the moment, pointing to years of warnings that housing apex predators in concrete tanks was not just controversial, but dangerous. SeaWorld issued a carefully worded statement, calling it an unforeseen accident, offering condolences while avoiding deeper questions. But to many of Keltie's colleagues, it was anything but unforeseen. Quietly, anonymously, they began to speak to reporters, confirming what the memos had already revealed. And as Keltie's family moved through their grief, sorrow hardened into resolve. They demanded accountability not only for her death, but for a system that had normalized asking humans to place their lives in the hands of instincts that could never truly be subdued. Nix never returned to the stage. In the weeks that followed, he was moved to an off-exhibit tank away from music crowds and applause. To some, this isolation looked like punishment. To others, a measure of mercy. Either way, it was silent. The echo of his absence spread through every corner of SeaWorld Orlando. Attendance numbers dropped sharply. School groups, once a reliable tradition, canceled field trips. Corporate sponsors quietly withdrew their support. The stadium that had once thundered with applause now carried only the mechanical hum of pumps and the soft lapping of water against concrete walls. Beyond the park's gates, the tragedy sparked ripples of change. Federal regulators introduced tighter safety rules, prohibiting trainers from entering tanks during live performances. But the conversation had already grown larger than protocols. Across the country, people began questioning not just the risk to trainers, but the very ethics of holding such immense predators in captivity. Keltie Byrne became more than a name in the headlines. She stood as a symbol of devotion, of the fragile threshold between connection and control, and of the cost when instinct eclipses trust. Her story lingered in the public imagination, carried in quiet conversations about what it truly means to place wild power within human boundaries. And as the years moved forward, that question continued to circle back like a tide that refuses to recede, leaving behind the unshakable awareness that the line between partnership and peril can never fully be erased. In the end, the legacy of Keltie's story stretched far beyond the walls of Shamu Stadium. For those who had watched her grow from a young girl clutching encyclopedias to a trainer standing at the water's edge, her journey embodied both wonder and warning. She had devoted her life to understanding creatures shaped by vast oceans, guided by instincts honed over thousands of years. Yet the tragedy revealed the limits of human control, exposing the fragile illusion that trust alone could tame an apex predator. Nix remained alive, circling in his silent tank, a living reminder of the questions that now demanded answers. Could true connection exist within confinement? Or did captivity distort the very bond trainers believed they were building? For animal welfare advocates, the event became a turning point, fueling campaigns that reached courts, legislatures, and classrooms. For Keltie's family, grief carried forward as determination, their calls for change echoing across the country. And for the public, the story left an imprint that outlasted news cycles, a reminder that behind the spectacle of splashing water and synchronized dives are lives, human and animal alike, bound together in ways far more complex than any show could reveal. The debate over the future of marine mammal performances was no longer abstract. It was marked by a name, a face, and a day when trust met instinct in a way the world could not look away from. And as the ocean itself continued its eternal rhythm, one truth remained: the sea had always belonged to its giants, and perhaps it always would. The ocean has always held its own truth, majestic, mysterious, and beyond control. Keltie Byrne devoted her life to bridging that divide, but her story reminds us how fragile the line is between trust and instinct. Nix was not a villain, nor was Keltie careless. Together they showed us the risk of placing wild power within human walls. The applause has faded, yet the questions remain. Should apex predators live in concrete tanks or only in the vast stage of the sea? As tides continue their eternal rhythm, Keltie's legacy endures as a call for respect, caution, and reflection. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful documentaries. And tell us in the comments, do you believe creatures like Nix belong in captivity or only in the wild?